My fellow Southern Cameroonians and the children of Amazonia and worldwide also are very interested in our program. I'm very happy to come to us one more time this year, 2026. This is our first presentation, and I hope that it's going to be interesting. This year, I expect to be a wonderful year. We're going to educate ourselves extensively about our land and our people, and also prospects of the future for us, which I believe is going to be good. This day, I want to bring to us the dilemma that our people have been experiencing under the influence of the French. I want us to review how the French, having lost territory in North America, having been humiliated in Western Europe, as well as in Indochina, carried their rage to the African continent, and particularly to Cameroon. And since then, have perpetually used the individuals they control as our leaders, the dictators, Ahijo and subsequently Biya, to be in perpetual warfare against the citizens of Cameroon, and by extension, the people of the former British Southern Cameroon, who have been taken recently in this war and are being literally defeated, killed, and their properties destroyed, like it's happening right now as we're speaking in Kumbo, in the town of Banso, where La Republique has surrounded the market square and is destroying people's shops, burning houses, and killing people there massively. So I want to go here and bring out a first video about the War of Cameroon. This is the war that after the Second World War, as I said, the French were humiliated in Indochina, and they came back humiliated and enraged and anger, tried to force Algeria to stay with them, but even then as well, the Algerians overpowered the French, and the French took their last stand in sub-Saharan Africa, which they are going to lose with time. And their fight against our indigenous people in sub-Saharan Africa, in the land of Cameroon, I want to show us in some videos what they have been doing. You will see here how they literally maltreated the French, the Francophone, our Francophone borders in the eastern part of Cameroon, in their territory, which is a different country from the former British Southern Cameroon in terms of when we got independence. They got their independence on January 1 of 1960. We were supposed to have had our independence on October 1 of 1961. You will see how the French did everything to compromise the effort of achieving independence for the French-speaking, and continue to kill them till today. So, in fact, what they did after the recent election, where they killed so many and subdued them to maintain the dictatorship guided by the French, and pushed away Issa Chiroma, who defeated them in the election, is what they have always done. And as I said, by extension, they also went to the former British Southern Cameroon and have been killing our people since we acquired independence in 1961, and particularly since 2016 and 2017. Let us see in this first video, please, the actions of the French and their chosen leadership of La République du Cameroun towards the citizens of that country, and we'll go further later on with what they do to the people of British Southern Cameroon. Let's watch the video of the War of Cameroon from 1955 to 1971. Thank you.
Cette population-là, et avec l'armée française, ils ont ouvert le feu. Ils ont décimé cette population et il y avait un seul survivant. Les fils de papa, sauf qu'il peut. Et c'est comme ça que les corps tombaient. Je ne marchais pas encore comme maintenant. J'ai piétiné. Les cadavres comme ça. Les mitrailleuses, vous voyez même, ça coupait les ailes.
La France continue à nier officiellement. François Fillon est allé à Yaoundé en 2009 et a dit « Tout ce que vous racontez, ce sont de pures inventions ». Pourquoi est-ce qu'ils nient? Parce qu'ils en ont honte, parce que c'est pas très glorieux d'avoir fait une guerre à un parti qui était l'Union des populations du Cameroun, l'UPC, qui réclamait seulement l'indépendance, qui réclamait seulement la démocratie. Et c'est pour empêcher ça que la France a mené une guerre avec ses alliés camerounais de l'époque face à ce parti-là. Et il y a eu des atrocités, il y a eu des bombardements, il y a eu des tortures.
Vous connaissez à peu près le bilan de cette guerre?
C'est difficile à chiffrer, les estimations qu'on a tournent autour de 100 000 morts, mais ce sont des estimations qui viennent souvent de sources françaises, donc peut-être minimisées, et on peut penser qu'il y en a eu plus que ça. C'est assez difficile à dire. Nous, on ne s'est pas vraiment axé sur le bilan chiffré, on essaie de montrer les mécanismes qui ont conduit à cette guerre et qui ont conduit à la confiscation de l'indépendance.
Contrairement à ce que certains voudraient faire croire, la colonisation ne s'est pas déroulée comme l'entrée d'un couteau dans du beurre. Les Africains n'étaient pas des lâches. Nombreux sont ceux qui ont combattu avec courage contre la domination coloniale, souvent au prix de leur vie. Ces résistants ont donné naissance à de véritables guerres, et l'une des plus meurtrières en Afrique reste la guerre du Cameroun. Plus de 200 000 personnes ont péri, victimes des actes effroyables de l'armée coloniale française. Cette guerre, d'une importance capitale, devrait être connue de tous les Camerounais, et plus largement de tous les Africains. Pourtant, elle reste très peu documentée. On pourrait même dire qu'elle est sciemment placée sous le sceau du secret. Et c'est vraiment dommage car connaître son passé est essentiel pour comprendre son présent et mieux envisager son futur. Quand on regarde la relation actuelle entre le Cameroun et la France, il y a de quoi être troublé. On a l'impression qu'un crime de cette ampleur n'a jamais existé, comme si plus de 200 000 personnes étaient mortes pour rien du tout. Cette guerre, appelée guerre du Cameroun, guerre d'indépendance ou encore guerre de l'UPC, a duré plus de 15 ans. Elle a opposé les nationalistes camerounais dirigés par l'UPC à l'armée coloniale française, puis au gouvernement post-indépendance soutenu par Paris. Dans cette vidéo, nous allons découvrir comment le gouvernement colonial français a injustement dissous un parti politique nationaliste, comment des Camerounais ont risqué leur vie en prenant les armes face à des forces bien supérieures. Et surtout, comment la France a méthodiquement éliminé les leaders de ce mouvement tout en bombardant des régions entières du Cameroun. Sans plus tarder, la guerre du Cameroun, c'est maintenant. Comme le Togo, le Cameroun a une histoire particulière marquée par 3 colonisations, allemande, française et britannique. Les Allemands arrivent après les Portugais, mais ce sont eux qui instaurent la première colonisation officielle. Celle-ci dure 32 ans, de 1884 à 1916, et provoque d'énormes dégâts. Les Bakas, par exemple, sont régulièrement traqués et étudiés comme des animaux. Certains sont même transportés en Allemagne pour être exposés dans des eaux humains ou lors d'expositions coloniales. Les Allemands n'hésitent pas non plus à réprimer violemment les premières résistances nationalistes camerounaises. Des figures comme Martin Paul Samba et Douala Mangabel, qui s'opposent à l'ordre colonial, sont exécutés. En 1914, la Première Guerre mondiale éclate. Pendant le conflit, la France et la Grande-Bretagne envahissent le Cameroun, battent les Allemands et les chassent du territoire en 1916. 3 ans plus tard, en 1919, soit 1 an après la fin de la guerre, le Cameroun est placé sous mandat de la Société des Nations. Le territoire est alors divisé. La partie orientale est administrée par la France et la partie occidentale par la Grande-Bretagne. Les entreprises françaises et britanniques s'implantent rapidement pour exploiter les ressources naturelles. Dans de nombreuses régions, les Camerounais sont contraints aux travaux forcés au profit de ces compagnies. Pourtant, des voix s'élèvent de plus en plus contre cette exploitation, tant au Cameroun que dans la métropole. En France, par exemple, des membres du Parti communiste français PCF dénoncent la colonisation. En 1939, la Seconde Guerre mondiale éclate. Les Camerounais, enrôlés de force dans les bataillons des tirailleurs sénégalais, combattent pour la France. À la fin du conflit en 1945, beaucoup périssent au front, tandis que les survivants, bien que chanceux, ne reçoivent même pas les primes promises pour leur participation. Toutefois, cette guerre marque un tournant. Les Camerounais commencent à voir l'Europe différemment. Ils découvrent une Europe affaiblie, dévastée et surtout dépendante de ses colonies pour se reconstruire. C'est dans ce contexte que Ruben Oumniobé et ses camarades, à travers des syndicats comme l'Union des syndicats confédérés du Cameroun USCC, entament des revendications pacifiques pour la réunification des deux Camerouns et l'indépendance du pays. En 1945, ces mouvements de contestation prennent de l'ampleur, notamment avec la grève des cheminots de Douala, menée sous l'impulsion des leaders syndicaux comme Ruben Oumniobé. Face à ces grèves, l'administration coloniale réagit brutalement. L'armée envoyée pour réprimer les manifestants. Des camions militaires équipés de mitrailleuses ouvrent le feu, faisant une cinquantaine de morts et une centaine de blessés. Ruben Oumniobé, bien qu'étroitement surveillé, parvient à échapper à cette répression sanglante. En 1946, un an après la fin de la Seconde Guerre mondiale, la France, désireuse de calmer les premières voix nationalistes africaines, autorise la création de partis politiques en Afrique. Rapidement, un parti devient extrêmement populaire, le Rassemblement démocratique africain RDA, un mouvement panafricain fondé en 1946 par des Africains visant à revendiquer pacifiquement et politiquement l'indépendance des colonies. Ruben Oumniobé, figure emblématique du nationalisme camerounais, participe à la création du RDA à Bamako, aux côtés de son ami Léopold Moumé Etia. Il rejoint le RDA et s'intègre à son aile radicale qui milite réellement pour une indépendance immédiate. Ruben est même élu vice-président du parti, présidé alors par Félix Houphouët-Boigny. Cependant, la rapide expansion du RDA et la diffusion du nationalisme africain qui l'inspire inquiète l'administration coloniale française qui commence à percevoir ses dirigeants comme des menaces. Bien que puissant et influent à l'échelle continentale, le RDA reste limité dans son impact local. Cela conduit à la création de partis nationalistes à l'échelle des colonies, qui s'affilient au RDA. Ainsi, en 1948 au Cameroun, naît l'Union des populations du Cameroun, UPC. Parmi ses fondateurs figurent Léopold Moumé Etia, Jacques Ngom, Charles Assalé, Guillaume Hond, Joseph Raymond Itundi, Georges Yemi, Théodore Ngosso, Guillaume Bagal, Léonard Bouli, Emmanuel Yap, Jacques-René Bidoum, Manga Mado et Ruben Oumniobé. L'UPC acquiert rapidement une influence majeure dans le pays. Ses membres sillonnent le Cameroun pour éveiller les consciences, promouvoir l'esprit nationaliste, combattre le tribalisme et prôner la solidarité dans la lutte pour l'indépendance. Le parti organise même des grèves et devient ainsi la formation nationaliste la plus puissante des colonies francophones. Mais ce succès inquiète les colons qui répriment violemment ses membres. Face à cette répression, une nouvelle génération de leaders émerge, donnant un nouveau visage à l'UPC. Parmi eux, au sein des Afana, Abel Kingé, Félix Roland Momier, Ernest Wandier et Ruben Oumniobé, qui en devient le chef après le retrait de Léopold Moumé Etia.
L'UPC a demandé à intervenir sur 3 questions.
En 1952, Ruben Oumniobé se rend aux États-Unis pour plaider la cause camerounaise devant la 4e commission de tutelle de l'Assemblée générale de l'ONU. Il réclame la réunification immédiate des deux Camerouns et exige la fixation d'une date pour leur indépendance.
L'UPC a demandé à intervenir sur 3 questions. La réunification immédiate du Cameroun, la constitution d'un conseil de gouvernement et d'une assemblée avec des pouvoirs législatifs. Et enfin, la fixation d'un délai pour le droit de l'indépendance au peuple camerounais. Telles sont, Monsieur le Président, les questions sur lesquelles le peuple de mon pays m'a mandaté pour venir ici. Je vous remercie, Monsieur le Président.
En 1954, 2 ans après le passage de Ruben Oumniobé à l'ONU, Roland Pré, alors haut commissaire français au Cameroun, prend la décision ferme d'éradiquer l'UPC. Afin de faciliter la surveillance et d'intensifier la pression judiciaire sur ses dirigeants, ces derniers sont regroupés à Douala. Abel King, vice-président de l'UPC, est poursuivi pour outrage à magistrat. Pierre Penda, membre du comité directeur, fait l'objet de 5 plaintes successives. Félix Moumier est accusé de diffamation et injure et Ruben Oumniobé est condamné pour dénonciation calomnieuse. Roland Pré procède également à une purge au sein de l'appareil judiciaire, renvoyant en France les magistrats jugés trop indulgents envers l'UPC. Parallèlement, les forces de l'ordre et les organisations camerounaises alliées à l'administration coloniale, notamment le Rassemblement des populations du Cameroun RPC, sont mobilisées pour empêcher les réunions et discours publics de l'UPC. La surveillance s'intensifie. Les correspondances privées des militants sont systématiquement contrôlées et leurs domiciles fréquemment perquisitionnés. Cependant, entre le 20 et le 30 mai 1955, une série d'affrontements éclate. Les militants de l'UPC, organisés en groupe, affrontent leurs adversaires politiques locaux soutenus par l'administration coloniale française ainsi que par les forces de l'ordre. Ces événements marquent l'irruption de la violence dans la vie politique camerounaise et marquent le début de la guerre du Cameroun. Un conflit qui durera près de 16 ans et fera plus de 200 000 morts. Le 13 juillet 1955, un décret colonial dissout officiellement mais injustement l'UPC. De nombreux militants sont arrêtés et d'autres sont assassinés. Contraint à la clandestinité, le parti finit par opter pour la lutte armée. Sous la supervision de Pierre Mesmer, le nouveau haut-commissaire au Cameroun, une répression massive s'abat sur les membres de l'UPC. Traumatisé par la défaite française en Indochine, Mesmer semble animé par un seul objectif: exterminer tous les membres de l'UPC. Courte annonce. Vous êtes en Afrique et souhaitez poursuivre vos études en Allemagne, je vous présente Lösung to Germany. Il simplifie énormément votre voyage. Il vous aide à trouver un logement adapté à vos besoins, à créer un compte bancaire allemand pour votre dépôt de caution, à obtenir une préinscription dans une université allemande, à rechercher un garant pour votre prise en charge, si nécessaire, à vous préparer pour l'interview à l'ambassade et à répondre à toutes vos questions concernant la procédure. À partir des contacts qui s'affichent à l'écran, contactez Lösung to Germany pour simplifier votre procédure.
Nous avions tous, surtout ceux qui avaient été en Indochine, réfléchi au dispositif et nous en savions beaucoup.
Mesmer appelle en renfort les troupes des colonies voisines. Le territoire est quadrillé. C'est le début de la guerre sur les deux fronts, militaire et psychologique. Constitution de milices locales, propagande. Tout individu trouvé en dehors des camps est considéré comme rebelle et abattu sur le champ.
On rassemble les petits villages en gros villages que l'on peut contrôler. Et deuxièmement, on fait circuler de petites patrouilles pour courir après les petits groupes de Mniobé. Au Mniobé faisait régner la terreur. Et à partir de ce moment-là, j'ai décidé de lui faire la guerre et de l'éliminer.
À partir de ce moment-là?
Oui.
L'armée française mène alors de véritables opérations de guerre dans les régions Bassa et Bamileke. Des milliers de Camerounais sont rassemblés de force, mitraillés et bombardés depuis des hélicoptères. Les nationalistes et de milliers d'innocents subissent également des bombardements au napalm sur leur zone de repli.
C'est pas seulement des rumeurs. Le napalm a été utilisé au Cameroun. Le napalm a été utilisé au Cameroun, même s'il y a certains démentis pour la forme. Monsieur Mesmer ne pourra pas faire un démenti sérieux à ce sujet.
Donc vous avez entendu parler de napalm?
Oui, c'est pas important.
Après les massacres, les têtes des combattants indépendantistes tués sont coupées et exposées dans les villages et camps de regroupement pour intimider les populations. Face à une telle violence, l'UPC résiste tant bien que mal. Armés de simples machettes, gourdins, arcs et flèches, les combattants se regroupent en petites unités de 50 à 200 hommes pour tenter de tenir tête à l'armée coloniale.
Comme les militaires menaçaient trop, nous avions organisé un camp pour garder la population. Les militaires ont surpris cette population-là et avec l'armée française, ils ont ouvert le feu. Ils ont décimé cette population et il y avait un seul survivant.
Pour empêcher la propagation du mouvement de contestation, les populations Bassa et Bamileke vivant en ville sont déportées vers des camps situés le long des principaux axes routiers. Le général Lamberton, responsable des forces françaises, ordonne la destruction systématique de toutes les habitations situées en dehors des zones de regroupement, ainsi que le saccage des cultures environnantes. Les déportés sont ensuite soumis aux travaux forcés, notamment au profit de la société française Razel, spécialisée aujourd'hui dans la construction de routes en Afrique. Le regroupement des populations dans des zones spécifiques permet à l'administration coloniale de créer ailleurs des zones interdites. Toute présence humaine dans ces zones est strictement interdite et les personnes qui y sont découvertes sont immédiatement considérées comme des nationalistes et sont exécutées. Ces zones sont totalement privées de ressources. Les cultures y sont systématiquement détruites, les points d'eau contaminés et le bétail abattu. Au fil des mois, les troupes françaises, composées de soldats camerounais, de recrues issus des colonies africaines et de quelques officiers français notoirement racistes, accentuent leur pression. Elles prennent rapidement l'avantage. Isolées des populations qui sont désormais sous surveillance stricte, les nationalistes se retrouvent dans une précarité extrême. Ils souffrent de la faim en raison de la destruction des champs et des sources d'eau et manquent cruellement de médicaments, de vêtements et d'équipements. Le recrutement devient également de plus en plus difficile et certains combattants commencent même à mourir de faim. En 1958, Amadou Ahidjo, récemment nommé Premier ministre par la France, entre en contact avec Robert Omniobé par l'intermédiaire de l'archevêque de Douala, Thomas Mongo. Cependant, Omniobé reste ferme et déclare que la seule condition pour mettre fin à la révolte est la réunification des deux Cameroun et l'indépendance totale du pays. Cette réponse irrite profondément Ahidjo et ses maîtres français. La même année à Bachenga, Amadou Ahidjo organise une réunion avec Moussa Yaya Sakifada et Charles Okala. Ensemble, avec l'aval des autorités françaises, ils décident de procéder à l'élimination physique de Robert Omniobé, comptant bien sûr sur le soutien infaillible de l'armée française. Après de longs mois de traque, marqués par l'arrestation ou l'exécution des partisans d'Omniobé, l'armée française parvient finalement à le localiser grâce à la trahison d'un compatriote camerounais. Le 13 septembre 1958, alors qu'il tente de traverser un tronc d'arbre pour échapper aux soldats français, Robert Omniobé est abattu froidement de 3 balles dans le dos. Il s'éteint à l'âge de 45 ans. Son cadavre est ensuite traîné dans la boue sur une distance d'une dizaine de kilomètres dans une ultime démonstration d'humiliation.
Il a été abattu de dos, il a été tué lui sur le coup. Il n'y a eu ni sommation ni volonté de l'arrêter vivant. Il faut préciser qu'il n'était pas armé. Personne dans ce groupe n'était armé. Personne dans le maquis de Oum n'était armé. Ils l'ont traîné après sur plusieurs kilomètres jusqu'au village d'abord de Boumiébel, où ils ont exposé le corps. Donc c'était de l'action psychologique. Le fait de le traîner, de traîner son corps par terre, dans la boue, de le défigurer, de l'humilier, en fait d'humilier même le cadavre, puisque comme il n'avait pas pu l'humilier de son vivant, il fallait humilier le cadavre et d'aller ensuite l'exposer au village.
Après l'assassinat de Robert Omniobé, un événement qui réjouit à la fois Amadou Ahidjo et les autorités françaises, Paris impose à Ahidjo la signature de nombreux accords de coopération. Une fois ces accords ratifiés, le général de Gaulle décide de donner une pseudo-indépendance pour le Cameroun. Ainsi, le 1er janvier 1960, Amadou Ahidjo annonce l'indépendance du pays, une indépendance qu'il n'a pourtant jamais réclamée.
Camerounais des villes, des villages et des campagnes, nos cœurs battent aujourd'hui ensemble d'un même rythme. Notre drapeau national flotte partout au vent de notre joie. Vive la liberté, vive le Cameroun indépendant.
So, my dear people, you can see from the preceding video that just finished the atrocities that the French carried out in La République du Cameroon before they gave them a presumed independence. And remember that La République du Cameroon was supposed to get its independence granted at the United Nations on January 1 of 1960, while the children of the former British Southern Cameroon, who are a totally different nation from La République du Cameroon, were to get their independence on October 1 of 1961. And before that happened in French Cameroon, you saw in the video the horrible things that the French did, killing any dissenting voices, anybody who was asking for true independence, people who were innocent. They were not bad people. They were not what they call terrorists. They were not people who were even trying to fight the French administration. They were basically asking for freedom for their people, for their rights, and for true democracy, and advocating that the two Cameroons that were originally the one German Cameroon should come back together. And the French wanted to fully control all the resources of the land, and they did not want to work with them. And they used Ahijo. They introduced and put in place the people that they wanted to use. So they imposed Ahijo on La République du Cameroon and used him to kill all these individuals who people call today maquisards, or the French were regarding as terrorists. Yet they were not. These were just innocent children in their own homeland advocating for themselves and for their rights and for their freedom. And this bad attitude of the French has continued till today. Recently, if you noticed in the elections that was carried out in La République du Cameroon post-election, after they stole the results, just like they have always done, they have never had any true, free, and fair elections in that country. The French stole elections to put Ahijo in there. They always did the same. After they stole the election and the people rose up to express themselves, they brutally put it down, just like the French are doing in this video. They brought the military out, they killed a lot of people, and chased Issa Chiroma out of the country. That is what has always been happening. They rule by putting the gun on the citizen's head. All the military, everybody in uniform, whether it's the police, the gendarmerie, and the army you see in La République du Cameroon, is not there to serve the children of the land. They are there to suppress them, to put basically their knees on the necks of the citizens, to subdue them under the control of the French. That's what goes on in that country. And so, unfortunately, this is the situation that we found ourselves, that we were now advocating to join them after we acquire our independence. So the children of former British Southern Cameroon, after they were granted independence on October 1 of 1961, were compelled to join a country that was at war with its citizens. And so we joined La République du Cameroon. And since then, La République du Cameroon has carried this rage of France and against our people. You notice them taking on the fight to us, and they have been killing our people, burning our villages, doing the same things that you saw them do in these videos to French citizens. You notice how they killed Nyobe and dragged his body in mud for several kilometers, destroyed the body, disfigured it, and then displayed it to humiliate his personality in front of the citizens and intimidate them psychologically. You notice that in this Amazonian war, where La République du Cameroon, guided by the French, were killing our people, they have also picked up people that they have killed and exposed their dead bodies in public places and done the same thing that they were doing in this video. This is the psychological warfare that the French carry on the Africans to subdue them. That's what they did to the French Francophone citizens, and that's what they are doing to the children of the former British Southern Cameroon, the children of Ambazonia. I will bring the next video segment to show us how La République du Cameroon, guided by the French, have done the same thing among the children of Ambazonia in the small piece of land of Ndu in Donga Mantung division, so that you can see how they have carried this to our own land. Let's bring that video showing the atrocities of La République du Cameroon in the former British Southern Cameroon in the territory of Ndu. that they did recently. Let's show that video, please.
And without consequences.
As she was moving towards the house, she was shot by the back, and that was all. Then she fell down. You can see her eyes and everything. All those, she fell on stones. Not that she had anything with any law officer, any quarrel with anybody, nothing.
Today, a lesser man occupies the continent of Africa, not by the making of God, but by the making of man.
And the first one has died, and the second one is the one we have just talked to, and the third one will be talking to him later. Was this one shot at the back?
You were shot on the back.
On the back? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
What keeps the African a lesser man varies from country to country and region to region, depending on the power in control.
The problem we have out there is that by some conspiracy of the European powers, two distinct peoples were forced to become one. And what is happening is that those of English expression have been put under the French sphere of influence. And the French sphere of influence is doing everything to abuse the privileges they've known, to distort the perception they have about life, and to reduce them effectively into second-class citizens in their own country.
The victims were shot, and as you can find there, you have bullet wounds on the vehicle. That's a bullet wound. Then the second one is fine, the second bullet wound there.
That's where Banta Hillary was shot and killed.
This is where one of the victims, Banta Hillary, was shot and killed.
The next morning he was found still in the sitting posture, stiff, right
inside the vehicle.
Right inside the vehicle. The CPDM politicians and the parliamentarians went up to Gambia and alerted the police or the gendarmes earlier on that the rally might take place. And so when they came down, really prepared for war, as I saw it, they discovered that the rally was not taking place. And it was at that juncture that they switched over into what we call a mock type tax drive. And so that is where the problem really started.
When there was a certain gendarme who came, was a certain gendarme who came, stood at the road and whistled. And then the rest of the gendarmes or armies rallied there. And then from there they met for this house. Then here he started breaking things.
Completely destroyed. Everything on the ground in pieces. You can see pieces of bottles, glasses. The clock broken.
We went into the room and then collected a big safe. And then 4 cartons of reams of papers.
It's a clear-cut situation of gross human rights violation, of inhumanity from man to man, let me say beast to man. Because what has unfolded in the Anglophone territory and Anglophones, the southern Cameroons, is not something that you will say that human beings do. That's something that beasts, only beasts are capable of doing.
You will see all the irony in the people here. They simply cannot understand why tax drives can cause the burning of beds, because beds do not pay tax.
I be wrong, because they beat women there.
They're just a bit women. They naked them. The bed is all bent and their family is only standing outside now. Yes, well, you have tax tickets for how many years?
For 9 years.
The Republic Cameroon police have always been terror agents and defenders of the ruling oligarchy and its despotic dispensation. They are complete strangers to the ethical role of a civilized police service as peacekeepers and public protectors.
One of the mothers who escaped and went and delivered in the bush, and that is the baby in the hand she's holding. You be wrong go for whose side, madam?
I be born for root for Ngaru. I go born for road for week.
You go born for road?
For inside bush.
For inside bush? Yes. Now who be heavy for there?
So mommy be just come up farm. There's way we go farm. They can take the picking for my hand.
They can take picking for your hand? Baby where you don't already born already?
Yes.
That's the owner of that TV there, that part. You can find how the things were scattered and broken down into pieces. Papa, now where did it happen? You get your tax ticket for this year?
Everything correct. Yeah, civil servant.
Then broke your television?
They broke my television, they broke my radio, flask, everything.
My people, you can see how, by extension, La République du Cameroon, guided by the French, carried out the same atrocities that they had done in French Cameroon, in Bassaland, in Bamileke, and they have been carrying this out among our people in perpetuity. In this video, going back a long time ago in Du, you saw how they went to a local community, the local so-called CBDM elites who collaborate with La République du Cameroon for crumbs. They were collaborating with them against their own people, alerted the military to attack. And when the military came, they realized that the people were peace-loving and they were no longer going to hold any meeting. And what they did, they started claiming that they were looking for taxes and started attacking the people, both men and women and children. Broke the windows to their houses, shot and killed some, like you see in these dead cops here, and then chased them where some women who were pregnant had to deliver babies, but in the bushes by themselves. And some, luckily, with some assistance, destroyed their properties like televisions or beds or anything that they owned, even though the people had paid their taxes for almost 9 years and had evidence to prove that they do pay their taxes. They don't care. Even if you have the right documents, they still go after you to kill and destroy, which is what they do. So La République du Cameroon has been carrying the same atrocities in English Cameroon, in the people in the land of the former British Southern Cameroon of Ambazonia, a separate country from the Republic of Cameroon, that the French had been doing with them, because the French are them, basically their minders, the people who are guiding them and leading them through all of this. And so they have subjugated our people to this kind of hardship and continue to this day. Like I was saying, right now as we're speaking, the main market in Banso land in Kumbo has been surrounded by the military. They are going around destroying people's sheds, burning them, destroying properties, and killing the people of Ndu, of Kumbo, like I'm talking. It is really an atrocious thing that the French do. This is what the French have carried out among our people. And all the dictators that they put in place, like Ahidjo that I talked about, they prepared him and brought him and imposed him and put away Mbida, who was actually working with the French. You know, the French were persecuting and killing UPC militants, and Mbida was trying to work with them, thinking he could get to some level of compromise to achieve that independence that was proposed by the United Nations. But the French were not interested in any independence. They wanted to camouflage and deceive them. And so they prepared Ahidjo, a man from the north, to replace Mbida, whom they used as a dictator until they had prepared the next person they would use, who is Paul Biya. And so they groomed him from his childhood. His father was a catechist who migrated to the territory of the southern part of La République du Cameroon from Equatorial Guinea. He's a member of the Fang Bulu group. And so his father was a catechist of the Catholic Church. They moved him to where they are right now in Vomeka. And he was taken into custody, basically controlled by the Catholic priest from France. And so they were training him, taking him through school, and he was acting as an altar boy. helping the priest delivering mass. And as you know, that priests are pedophiliacs. They have sexual relations with little children and boys and molest people's wives. They maltreated this child, unfortunately, like that, to subdue him, to humiliate him, and then prepared him in the process to become the next dictator of Cameroon. And in one of the videos, I would like to show us how this beer was prepared by French priests and subsequently Jacques Foccart, the French agent that Charles de Gaulle used to prepare African dictators, how they used him to prepare not only beer, but the dictators and the leaders that collaborate with them to subjugate the people still under French control to do the same things that they have been doing. The country has never had true peace. And unfortunately, our people live through this, like you see in this video here. If we can bring the video of Paul Biya's preparation to become the next dictator after Ahidjo, that would be also very educative to see how they prepare dictators in Africa. Let's bring that video, please, of Paul Biya's preparation by the French to become the next dictator after Paul Biya, after Ahidjo, which he has continued till today. And they are preparing to replace this man after he's pronounced dead at some point by the next dictator. There are no true elections in La République du Cameroun. So let's bring that video to show how the
power, becoming one of the world's longest-serving leaders. The nearly 90-year-old autocrat has uninterruptedly ruled Cameroon since being sworn in for the first time on 6 November 1982, following the resignation of the country's first post-independence president, Ahmadou Ahidjo. After the fall of Zimbabwe's Robert Mugabe in 2017, Paul Biya became Africa's oldest president and its longest-serving after Equatorial Guinea's Teodoro Obiang Nguema Basogo, who seized power in 1979. Human rights groups have accused him of brazen strongman tactics, including torture and intimidation of his opponents. In this episode of African Biographics, we look at the rise to power of Cameroon's strongman Paul Biya and how he has managed to hold on to power for so long. Paul Biya was born in 1933 in the southern Cameroonian village of Mvomeka. His parents were not wealthy, but his small village was a surprising springboard for his accomplishments in life. At 7 years old, his parents sent him to the Catholic mission, which was approximately 50 kilometers from his home. One of Biya's French tutors there found his work as being excellent and determined that the young boy should become a priest. When he was 14 years old, he was admitted to Edia and Akono junior seminaries run by the Center Spirit Catholic Fathers. As for Cameroon itself, the nation was a German colony from 1884 to February 1916, when the Germans were defeated and ousted from the territory during the First World War by joint Anglo-French and Belgian forces. Britain and France decided to divide the country to permit each of them to administer their own territory separately. This meant that the legal, educational, monetary, and even political arrangements were significantly different in the two territories. Meanwhile, young Paul Biya's future was brightened further when he gained admission to the Lycée Le Dere in Yaoundé, Cameroon's capital. Lycée Le Dere was French Cameroon's most prestigious high school. At the Lycée, Paul Biya studied Latin, Greek, and philosophy. His excellent work in secondary school allowed him to study at the University of Paris, where he focused on law and political science. He received his law degree in 1960, and after graduation, Paul lived in France and studied public law at the Institute of Overseas Studies. Meanwhile, the territory administered by France, French Cameroon, got its independence on 1 January 1960 as the Republic of Cameroon. The territories of Cameroon that were administered by Britain, British Southern Cameroon and British Northern Cameroon, which were semi-independent territories administered as part of Nigeria, were to decide through a plebiscite to get their full independence by either joining Nigeria or French Cameroon. British Northern Cameroon voted to join independent Nigeria, while British Southern Cameroon voted to gain independence by joining the already independent Republic of Cameroon. British Southern Cameroon and the Republic of Cameroon agreed on a two-state federation and drew up a federal constitution that effectively guaranteed independent administration of the states under a central federal authority. The federal constitution came into force on 1 October 1961 and the entity became the Federal Republic of Cameroon. Amadou Ahidjo was the first president of the Federal Republic of Cameroon, and his party, the Cameroon National Union, the CNU, won a majority in parliament. So the new federation was born. However, this was a troubled marriage from the onset. In 1972, Amadou Ahidjo changed the federal structure of the country in favor of a unitary state called the United Republic of Cameroon. This was not well received by the people of what was once called British Southern Cameroon, aka the Anglophones. Also at the time, for more than 2 decades as president, Amadou Ahidjo managed to create a system of government that served his vision of the Cameroon nation. This vision was a single-party state with a strong presidential system that virtually gave him complete control of all the state's institutions. President Amadou Ahidjo also built an extensive network of loyalists through a complex patronage system that gave him complete control over the appointment of top administrative and party officials. Consequently, all of them owed their allegiance to him. This was the nation to which Paul Biya returned in 1962 to begin his quiet ascension to the upper echelons of power. When Paul Biya returned to Cameroon, he got a job in the government and was put in charge of the Department of Foreign Development Aid. That position reported directly to President Ahidjo and also gave the young Paul Biya experience in financial management on an international scale. Paul Biya's relationship with the president was a fascinating one and one that would define his future. Over time, President Amadou Ahidjo became Paul Biya's political mentor and the two became very close. Their backgrounds and even their personalities were very different, however. President Ahidjo had worked as a telephone operator before becoming president, and he had only an elementary school education. Although Paul Biya came from humble beginnings, he was highly educated and enjoyed classical music and tennis. Despite these differences, Paul Biya became a loyal follower of the president. Under President Ahidjo, Paul Biya held a number of positions. He worked as Chief of the Cabinet, Secretary General of the Presidency, and Minister of State, becoming Cameroon's highest-ranking minister. In 1975, Amadou Ahidjo chose Paul Biya as Prime Minister, a position he held until 1982. This made Paul Biya President Ahidjo's legal successor. Now, November 6, 1982 is a very significant day in the history of Cameroon, and the events surrounding that day are still debated by historians. On that very day, President Ahidjo, citing health concerns, resigned as president. As was required by the constitution, he handed over the presidency to Paul Biya. The action stunned the nation. Paul Biya was largely unknown to the populace, and he was untried as a head of state. However, Amadou Ahidjo's resignation and his retention of the chairmanship of the CNU party made it clear to the public that he intended to rest physically while continuing to rule behind the scenes, with Paul Biya as his rubber stamp in charge of the day-to-day affairs of government. Amadou Ahidjo, like many, believed the party head position to be superior to that of president. Since the presidency had become his personal estate, Amadou Ahidjo was under the impression that he could return to office after his medical treatment, and his choice of Paul Biya was informed by his belief that Paul Biya was the least ambitious and most docile of his collaborators. He also believed that Paul Biya could be easily controlled even from the hospital bed. As it turned out, both Ahidjo and the people underestimated the quiet and humble Paul Biya. Paul Biya methodically began to assert himself, stamping his image on the nation's life and institutions. He reshuffled the old cabinet in June of 1983, and this action left the former President Ahidjo angered and frustrated because he had not been consulted. In August of 1983, a coup attempt against Paul Biya was seen as an effort by Ahidjo to regain power and influence. This failed coup d'etat resulted in Ahidjo's forced resignation from the party chairmanship and his exile to France. A month after the coup attempt, Paul Biya convened an emergency party congress in Yaoundé and was elected party chairman. Paul Biya then called for a presidential election in January of 1984, 1 year ahead of schedule. He emerged from that election as president of the republic, leaving behind the stigma of being called Ahidjo's president. But more drama was to ensue in the early days of Paul Biya's presidency. In early 1984, Paul Biya announced that he would soon rotate the Republican Guard in charge of presidential security. The Republican Guard was a paramilitary body that Amadou Ahidjo had created to protect himself, and one that was apparently better trained and equipped than the country's armed forces. Most members of the Palace Republican Guard came from Ahidjo's stronghold in the north. Amazingly, after the decree by Paul Biya, the Guard did not voice dissatisfaction with the impending reshuffle. However, a deadly coup occurred in April of 1984 when members of this presidential guard tried to capture the presidential palace. This was on 6 April 1984. On this day, the Republican Guard seized the presidential palace with tanks and heavy fire. They occupied the Yaoundé airport and captured the national radio station, which began playing martial music. The rebels immediately sealed off the army unit responsible for the defense of the capital. However, the rebel leaders misjudged the situation. First, by a trick of radio managers, their broadcast was heard only in Yaoundé and not in the provinces of the country. Secondly, as he was hiding in the palace bunker, President Paul Biya was able to communicate with the armed forces. And so the Yaoundé unit, or those around it, decided to fight for the president rather than join the rebellion. On April 7, after fierce fighting in the capital, the Armed Forces Minister declared the rebels defeated and asked them to surrender. The Republican Guard, however, continued to fight until April 9, when they were completely obliterated. The attempted coup of 1984 was one of the bloodiest yet seen in Africa, causing the death of more than 1,000 people, mostly civilians who were caught in the crossfire. Fortunately for the president, the attempted coup d'etat displeased the overwhelming majority of the Cameroonian people. Cameroonians were full of praise for the country's armed forces. The president's popularity began to soar. Interviewed from exile during the attempted coup, Amadou Ahidjo denied any involvement in the coup d'etat. Nonetheless, the military tribunal implicated him in the plot and sentenced him to death in absentia. But this coup attempt left a psychological mark on Paul Biya. Thereafter, unscripted public appearances became a rarity, and when Paul Biya's motorcade passed through the streets of the capital, crowds were kept at a distance. Now fully in charge of the nation, Paul Biya moved quickly to revitalize the country's institutions, imposing his image on national life and institutionalize what became known as his New Deal concept for Cameroon. The guidelines of this New Deal policy were political liberalization, rigor and moralization, as well as national integration. This New Deal was intended to bring about a Cameroon that was characterized by a larger degree of individual liberty and freer exchange of ideas, judicious and stringent management of public affairs, transparency and public accountability by government officials, as well as total absence of ethno-regional favoritism. President Paul Biya was seen as a breath of fresh air, and he stepped in saying the right things to different groups. He visited the nation's Anglophone regions, spoke in English, and even referred to Bamenda, a major city in the northwest region, as his second home. It was a marked difference from his predecessor, whose policies severely undermined English as a major part of the nation's bilingualism. And indeed, there was some measure of success during the early part of his rule. As I alluded to, during Ahidjo's administration, a virtual police state had existed in Cameroon, which severely limited political activities, including free speech and opinions, especially if they ran contrary to government policies. Now, President Paul Biya was promising an end to this and many other restrictions. For instance, in 1985, he had introduced a series of measures allowing greater individual and political freedom. More than a dozen privately owned newspapers and magazines popped up in the country, and some of them were highly critical of government policies. Change in Cameroon was not only restricted to the political arena. One of the goals of President Paul Biya's New Deal was to improve the social and economic conditions of the Cameroonian people. With the sale of oil becoming an important source of revenue in the early 1980s, the new president was able to finance many of his New Deal programs, including road construction and subsidizing the prices farmers received for their export crops. The government's commitment to health and educational development of Cameroonians was also evident under the New Deal policy. Between 1984 and 1985, for example, the budget of the Ministry of Health was increased by 32% over that of the previous year. The increase provided additional funds for the construction of new hospitals and clinics in many towns and villages. In March of 1985, Paul Biya revitalized the CNU party during a memorable congress that was held in Bamenda. The party structures were reorganized and the party was renamed the Cameroon People's Democratic Movement, the CPDM. Paul Biya also encouraged his countrymen to develop interest in politics and to freely air out their views. Despite these early successes, however, Cameroonians soon lost faith in the New Deal as the president made a U-turn and started to restrict free speech. He also became reluctant to implement some of the promises he had made. Simultaneously, within 2 years of taking office, Paul Biya made one of his most daring moves when he changed the name of the country to the Republic of Cameroon. The name East Cameroon took when it obtained independence in 1960. Anglophones were furious. Their leaders had neither been consulted nor given any advance warning. As a result, the Anglophones viewed this name change as an attempt to erase their identity and forcefully assimilate them into the majority French system. At the same time, the economic situation in the country started deteriorating. When the price of oil on the world market collapsed, the prices for Cameroon's main crops, cocoa, cotton, coffee and palm oil, also dropped. Beginning in 1987, Cameroon's economy shrank for 9 consecutive years. In addition, poor economic management had long plagued the country. Cameroonians started placing the blame on Paul Biya, and by the late 1980s, opposition to his government had grown. President Biya admitted that the country faced an economic crisis and the necessity of an IMF structural adjustment program and budget cuts was recognized. The realization that Cameroon had not been able to change the dependent nature of its economy regardless of the economic progress made since independence was a cause of much frustration. Despite the subsequent efforts made towards economic reform, conditions in Cameroon were less than ideal and corruption was rampant. By 1998, Cameroon was classed as the most corrupt country in the world by Transparency International. And in October of 2000, the Catholic Church in Cameroon denounced corruption, saying that corruption had permeated all levels of society. In the late 1980s, a movement was sweeping Africa to allow for multi-party democracies. Against this backdrop, people also started calling for change in the political landscape of Cameroon. And so in 1989, an attorney by the name Yondo Black formed a new major political party, initiating a significant change in the national political climate towards support for a multi-party system in Cameroon. In 1990, Yondo Black and his fellow political organizers were arrested and charged with destabilizing the government and encouraging ethnic tension. In May of that year, spurred by Yondo Black's arrest, another opposition leader, John Frundi, formed a political party called the Social Democratic Front, the SDF. John Frundi, who was a bookshop owner by profession, was to achieve great popularity among the urban masses because of his courage and populist style of leadership. Unfortunately, Paul Biya's government used violent force to break up the SDF's first public rally in Bamenda, and between 4 and 12 people were killed in this rally. In the aftermath, the state-controlled media tried to deny the government's responsibility for this bloody event, and they also started distorting the facts. Anglophone students at the University of Yaoundé, who demonstrated the same day in support of the SDF and political liberalization, were falsely accused by the regime of having marched in favor of the reintegration of Anglophone Cameroon into Nigeria and having sung the national anthem as well as hoisting the Nigerian flag. Leading members of Paul Biya's party strongly condemned the Anglophones for this treacherous action. 1991 was an equally turbulent year in Cameroon. In April, tensions between opposition groups and the government grew. Between April 10 and April 15, 8 pro-democracy demonstrators were killed and several others were wounded. In retaliation, on 25 June, the opposition groups declared a mass general strike across Cameroon under the name Operation Ghost Town. The aim of the operation was to shut down the function of nearly every city in the country. The opposition intended to paralyze the national economy and cut off support for the civil servants of the government. They wanted to end the reign of Paul Biya and to establish democratic procedures for subsequent elections. In response to the strike, the government established Operation Commanders, whose purpose was to re-establish public order. The commanders were sent to 7 of the 10 provinces to exercise control, and for several months, the commanders used excessive physical force against the protesters. At the same time, the government began an extensive crackdown on the national press. Paul Biya's administration established the new censorship authority to monitor the content of the press. Independent newspapers were confiscated. In response, on 4 September 1991, dozens of independent journalists staged a peaceful march to protest newspaper bans. Several journalists were injured when security forces confronted them and nearly 40 were detained. By October, however, the strain of the strike began to weigh too heavily on the opposition forces and the strikers of Cameroon. Businesses were unable to endure financially, and people were struggling without access to goods and services. The government's ability to maintain at least the image of control during the strike was the main asset that allowed them to wait out the strike. There was no threat of military insubordination, and the government was receiving significant financial support from outside the country. The nation of France retired part of Cameroon's debt and twice arranged for government officials to receive back pay. Additionally, the IMF sent several millions of dollars to the country for economic restructuring. In addition, the government's violent responses to protest, the general feeling that the protests were largely ineffective, and the government's ability to continue functioning led many of the opposition parties to settle for negotiations on Paul Biya's terms. And so in late October, a conference was held and various stakeholders came together with representatives from the government, multiple opposition parties and other parties including media representatives, business interests, religious leaders and workers and students' unions. The talks at the conference were restricted to constitutional questions and no reforms were made prior to the elections. Despite these disappointments, in late November, 41 political parties signed an agreement with the government. The SDF was not one of them. By the end of 1991, there were as many as 70 political parties in Cameroon, all of which were representing different interests and resistant to making concessions. The final outcome was decided in presidential elections held in October of 1992. After a campaign rife with intimidation, violence, fraud, and electoral irregularities, Paul Biya won only 40% of the vote, but his two opponents, though gathering between them 55%, split the vote, leaving Biya as being the victor. Even though many people suspected these elections were fraudulent, the president was supported by the former colonial power, France, which continued to be involved in the country through cooperation agreements. France therefore had a big interest in supporting Paul Biya to make sure its economic interests in the country would not be threatened. Eventually, the free resources that stemmed from foreign aid gave Paul Biya the means necessary to ensure his position in office in this time of great political and economic upheaval. Despite the myriad of challenges facing him, Paul Biya managed to hold on to power using underhand maneuvers. His rule was extended with victories in the multi-party elections held in 1997 and 2004. The presidential term had also been extended, first to 5 and then later to 7 years. These elections were marred by irregularities, although the 2004 election experienced fewer problems than the others and was generally viewed as free and fair. In 2007, Paul Biya announced his plan to revise the constitution, where the biggest change was eliminating the limit of 2 presidential mandates. In February of 2008, a popular revolt erupted against this plan. The level of repression was brutal. Hundreds of protesters were killed and thousands were arrested. However, in April of that year, the National Assembly passed a controversial constitutional amendment abolishing presidential term limits, thereby providing Paul Biya with the option to run again in the future, in which he did in the year 2011. In October 2018, Paul Biya won a 7th term in a vote that was marked by low turnout and voter intimidation. President Paul Biya's Achilles heel is the ongoing Anglophone crisis in Cameroon. Since independence, the Anglophones have staged several protests against perceived unfair economic and institutional discrimination, marginalization, and inequality in the appointment of public administrators. This has often caused a periodic outburst of violence, especially when government forces attempt to repress protesters. For instance, in October 2016, lawyers went on strike in an effort to force the government to stop appointing francophone magistrates who spoke no English and had no training in common law to preside over courts in the Anglophone regions. During peaceful demonstrations in the cities of Bamenda and Bua, the lawyers were roughly manhandled by government security forces. Teachers soon came out in support of the lawyers. The teachers wanted the government to stop posting francophone teachers who spoke no English to teach subjects other than French in Anglophone schools. Since then, there have been violent armed confrontations between the secessionist groups and the regular military. The United Nations say that the rebel conflict has killed more than 3,000 people and displaced more than 500,000 since fighting broke out in 2017. Civilians, particularly public service personnel and traditional leaders, are often targeted by both sides. The Anglophone crisis has been a true test of Paul Biya's leadership, and unfortunately, the octogenarian hasn't risen to the occasion, to say the least. Cameroon is in a state of deep crisis. Many commentators and critics say that Paul Biya's extraordinary political longevity can be ascribed to a mixture of astuteness and ruthlessness. Paul Biya has a close-knit group of loyalists who hold key positions and crushes or sidelines opponents and rivals. Many analysts also point to the role that corruption has played in entrenching Paul Biya's regime, with the spoils of this corruption allegedly going to his allies in government, the security forces, and Paul Biya's family. Meanwhile, Paul Biya has also been accused of being the absent president. An organization called the Organized Crime and Corruption Reporting Project, in a report in 2018, found that Paul Biya spent at least 4.5 years of his first 35 years in power on private visits abroad, at an estimated cost of more than $65 million. In some years, Paul Biya spent about a third of the year out of his home country. The vast majority of these trips are to Geneva, Switzerland, where Paul Biya frequents the 5-star Intercontinental Hotel, accompanied by his wife and a cabal of up to 50 people, often with government jobs. This is while, according to the United Nations, over 55% of Cameroonians live in poverty, which affects several aspects of their life, from health to education, living conditions, and work, among others. On Sunday, 6 November 2022, President Paul Biya marked 40 years in power, but any talk of who might succeed Paul Biya, who turns 90 in February of 2023, is strictly taboo in government circles and in Cameroon as a whole. Paul Biya looks set to be Cameroon's president for life. Thank you all for tuning in. This has been Tachenda for African Biographics.
So, my people, you can see the report here of another dictator that has been prepared by the French and has continued to date in Cameroon. And you notice that this presentation, the last video, was almost 2 years ago. And recently, he carried out another charade of a fake election that he stole again and remains in power until he dies. And he can die and they will pretend that he is not dead and continue ruling. They can put his corpse in a refrigerator and continue to do the same mischief that they have been doing. The French did that in Ivory Coast. When Houphouët-Boigny died, they hid the information for 7 full months until they had secured the next ruler that they agreed with, that the French wanted, before they pronounced that he was dead. It happened in Togo that Eyadema died, and they hid the information again for about 5 months until they had arranged for his son to take over before they announced that Eyadema was dead. Did the same thing in Gabon, where Omar Bongo died, and the information was hid for 3 full months. So this man can die, and they will pretend that he's ruling. That's why you hear him pretending, always claiming that he's going to form the next government in the next few days after this fake election. And you don't see anything happen. When he swore in, the election was in October. People usually anticipated a change of government after that. It never happened. When he swore in, he said he was going to pronounce a government soon. He never did. After the new year or during his end of year speech, he claimed he will form the government in a couple of days. He's not formed one. Because there is confusion in the camp. His mind does not work. This man has dementia. He's getting old and he's not thinking properly. His ministers don't want to be removed, so there is quarreling and arguing among his ministers. His wife does not want her family member who is the Secretary General to be removed, and they don't want people replaced in strategic positions, so they manipulate him. So the country does not truly have a leader. The French keep him so they can continue looting the resources of the land and pretend to stay quiet in the background. But anyway, things are going to change for the better, because change is a constant in life. Things must change. Just as we get old and die, things change. And so countries change with time. So things are going to change in La République du Cameroon, in that country, and the chips will fall where they truly belong. And I had said before in some previous outings about the destiny of that country being depicted on their flags that they have had throughout time. When Ahidjo was the first dictator put in by the French, the country, and we were compelled to join them, the country had a flag of 3 colors, namely green, red, yellow, and 2 yellow stars representing the 2 different nations, the French La République nation and the English-speaking former British Southern Cameroons, Ambazonia as we call it today, and not the second nation. Those 2 different distinct people were depicted on the green during the time of Ahidjo. And then eventually things moved over to the red during the time of this current dictator who says Cameroon is one and indivisible. And they now represent the people by just the one yellow star. And if you look at the red background, it's the color red of fire. And if you look at the symbol of his party, the civilian party, is a torch of fire. And that is what they use to go around burning infrastructures, burning our villages, burning our houses. Even in their ministries, they burn documents. When they realize that fraudulent documents will be identified, they go and fake a fire in the ministry to say, oh, fire came and burnt the documents. And then blood is red. So they send these wicked, cruel troops guided by the French to go around killing our people. And so there has been bloodshed in the land. So it was during the time of this current dictator. They did it all across the country, and particularly during the time of the Ambazonian genocide that they have been carrying out since 2016. They have killed over 60,000 children of the former British Southern Cameroon and hiding the figure. And they continue doing that quietly, just like they're doing now in Kumbo, the capital of Bui Division. They have surrounded the market and are killing lots of people, burning and destroying their shops, and doing a lot of atrocities, which cannot be mentioned because it's very humiliating. So each bloodshed that looks red, that is that red in this segment of the dictatorship represented by this man who calls himself still president of Cameroon. And he thinks that Cameroon will never change, but it will and must change. Just as it moved from the green of Ahidjo to the red where he is, with the 2 stars under Ahidjo moving over to the 1 star under his term, after he is dead and gone, pronounced dead and buried, the country will move over to the yellow. And you notice that the flag, the star representing the people, will disappear. Under the green, it was 2 stars representing the 2 individual peoples. Under the red of his dictatorship, torture, killings, and burnings, it was 1 star that is yellow. As he leaves the scene and disappears, and this is coming soon, the 1 star will move over to the yellow and will no longer be identified. What is going to happen is that the people will become their true self. They will become their authentic self. The children of the former British Southern Cameroon will become totally independent and free from La République du Cameroon. And that country will break up into about 4 different groups. The northerners that they currently are despising and killing, and they were going to carry over 200 of them to their military court and judge after they stole Chiroma's victory. So that northern group will separate and be a different country from the rest of the country. The Bamileke land, where the French carried atrocities of genocide from 1955 to 1971, and also the Bassa land, will break away from that country and be a totally different group by themselves, aside from the children of Amazonia. And then the smaller Bia group, who are the people now thinking that they control and enjoy the country and trying to force it into one, will break away and be by themselves as well. The people of the East, that's the Eastern region, will likely also break away from that group. And then the people will actualize their true potential. The people of the former British Southern Cameroon will flourish and reign and be a spectacular example in the continent of Africa, demonstrating our ingenuity, our intelligence, our momentum, and we will emerge and be known not only in the continent but also around the world. And we will be an example for these, finally, the French-speaking people of La République du Cameroun to emulate. They will look and basically be jealous of our progress and try to emulate from us. Meanwhile, the people that are surrounding this dictator will finish off what they have embezzled and stolen and basically be relegated to abject poverty and suffering after he is gone. That is the message I wanted to bring to you guys, my people, today. And we'll pass on to a different presentation another time. The future is pregnant with good news for the children of the former British Southern Cameroon and the children of Ambazonia, as well as the disenfranchised and maltreated people of La République du Cameroon, the northerners that are currently being persecuted after Chiroma's victory was stolen, and the Bamilekes who endured genocide from 1955 to 1971, as well as the Bassas. Thank you very much.